Now, when we're coaching resistant people, keep in mind resistant people can take on a lot of different forms. People that are never wrong, people who lead with arrogance, people who lack self-awareness, people who are just, quite frankly, not open to other people's thoughts or ideas because they don't listen. So resistant people are not just one category. They can take on a lot of different categories. Let me share, before I give you a sequence, of a story that I experienced years ago. I was at a neighborhood party, and a gentleman had walked in by himself and was a friend of the host, and really was spouting off, started to have a couple drinks in him. You can imagine the stereotype going through your mind right now. And the person was really becoming a loudmouth. And it was really interesting because people, as you watched, people would move away. They would have their niceties and, oh, it was nice talking to you. I want to go meet with this person over here. And they would make polite conversation to get away from them. See, here's the funny thing about angry, resistant, arrogant, arduous people. We don't walk towards them. We walk away from them, which does what? Never gives these people perspective of what they need to change. So the gentleman started to brag how he was in the medical industry. And he started to talk about how much money he was making. And when my wife had shared that she was in the medical field, he immediately assumed she was a nurse. And as I looked at him and my wife shook her head and she didn't want me to say anything, he kept going. And then she kind of walked away and said, okay, you're on your own. And I looked at him and I said, can I ask you a question? He said, sure. I said, what made you think she was a nurse? And he looked at me and he said, well, I assumed she was a nurse. I said, why? He said, well, I don't know. I said, oh, she's a doctor. He said, oh. And I said, do you mind some other information? He said, what? I go, she actually makes a lot more money than you. And he just looked dismayed. I said, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I said, I'm actually doing everything in my power to control myself because you just talked to my wife very chauvinistically. You did it in front of a large group of people, which could humiliate her. She's not humiliated. That's probably why she walked away. And I wanted to give you that perspective. He was a little bit taken back. He ended up leaving the party shortly after. And the host, the neighbors, came up to me and said, oh, thank you so much for doing that. I said, what do you mean? Every year he does that. And I said, well, how long has he been coming to this party? Listen for it. 11 years. 11 years. Nobody addressed this guy. Now, I was polite. I didn't get him in a headlock. I didn't punch him. I didn't raise my voice. So when we're coaching resistant people, we can be thoughtful. We've got to maintain our emotions. But if you look at this image, look at this guy. When we see a guy like this, do we want to go up and hug him or do we want to run in the other direction? So there are two strategies that I want to teach you. Rule of engagement and permission-based questions. So when you're with resistant people, they're resistant for a reason. And the reasons can vary from person to person. When we're having conversations with these people, use a rule of engagement. Bob, I'd like to give you some feedback. I want to share some insight with you. And I want to share this insight with you, but I'd like to ask you to do something. When we've had conversations in the past, sometimes we kind of get into it with each other. Notice I'm not blaming the person. I'd like to have you listen to me all the way through. And then I'd love to have a thoughtful conversation. Would you mind if I shared with you a couple insights where I think we could work more effectively together? So the rule of engagement is, let me get it all out. I want to control how you're going to respond. And then permission-based questions. Would you mind if I shared with you? See, when people open up the invitation and they allow the sharing because we've asked them, guess what happens? They become a little bit more accepting. Rule of engagement. The minute they start to interrupt, and sometimes they will, you just sit back and say, Bob, we agreed. You're going to let me get this all the way out. Oh, yeah, that's right. We control their listening skills. And here's the cool thing. The rule of engagement allows them to hear it. See, when you have people who are resistant and interruptive and have the old yeah, but before you even get done with your first sentence, guess what they're saying? I don't want to listen to you. Therefore, I don't even hear anything. Which disables these people from what? Truly getting better. So when you're coaching resistant people, remember, They're not bad people. They're just lacking awareness. Nobody gets born and by the age of 1, they make a dedicated commitment to being resistant. But sometimes it could be they don't trust people. They've trusted people in the past. They've been burned. They've had people who have broken their trust. There's a whole plethora of reasons why somebody's resistant. But if we thoughtfully engage and we can control the conversation, what we've done, because most of us walk away from people like this, what we've done is we've positioned this person to improve. That's why we coach.